Happy birthday, Sherlock Holmes. January 6, 2021. Now it's time for our Sherlock Holmes quiz. How do Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson meet? They both went to the same school. They were neighbors. Sherlock Holmes came to Dr. Watson's office when he was sick. A friend introduced them. D. A friend introduced them. Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes each had a mutual acquaintance named Stamford, who was working at a hospital called Bart's, and he introduced them because they were both looking for some place with reasonable rent to live in. John. Dr. Watson's full name is John H. Watson. A lot of people say that the H stands for Hamish. How many brothers and sisters does Holmes have? None. Just one older brother, two older brothers, one brother and one sister. B. Just one older brother. Sherlock Holmes mentions that he has an older brother, Mycroft Holmes, 7 years older. Later writers would make up other brothers and sisters that Holmes has, but in the original stories, he just had one sibling. Who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories? A. Conan Doyle, Charles Dickens, Oscar Wilde, or Thomas Hardy? Arthur Conan Doyle. That's just to see if you were remembering from before. Which of the following did Sherlock Holmes not say? When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. I am a brain, Watson. The rest of me is a mere appendix. Elementary, my dear Watson. Crime is common. Logic is rare. Actually, it's C. Elementary, my dear Watson. This is the most famous thing that Holmes did not say. He said elementary several times, and he says my dear Watson many times, but he never said it all together like that. Elementary, my dear Watson. Where do Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson live? 212B Baker Street, 221B Baker Street, 122B Baker Street, or 121B Baker Street? 221B Baker Street. That address is a real place in London, and if you go there today, you will see a Sherlock Holmes museum. You can write a letter to Sherlock Holmes at 221B Baker Street, but be sure to include the full address, including Marylebone, London, NW1 6XE, England. And check with your post office to make sure you have the right postage to get it overseas. Given postage and COVID, perhaps it's better if you just send them an email. What is the name of the landlady who takes care of Holmes and Watson? Mrs. Huntsley, Mrs. Hunter, Mrs. Humden, or Mrs. Hudson? Mrs. Hudson. We don't know what her first name is, but she has to put up with a lot with Sherlock Holmes as her tenant living on her upstairs flat. People coming and going at all hours, and lots of strange mysteries coming to her very doorstep with danger. When Holmes is not on a case, which of the following is something he likes to do? Play his violin, do chemical experiments, create scrapbooks of important information, or all of the above? D. All of the above. Holmes often feels bored when he's not on a case, so these are some of the ways he keeps his brain sharp. Number 10. What is the name of Holmes's arch enemy? Is it James Moriarty, Jamie Maria, Joseph Moriarty, or James Segerson? James Moriarty. a professor of mathematics, apparently, but really the Napoleon of crime. How many original Holmes stories are there? Novels and short stories put together. 60. There are 4 novels, and all the rest of the stories are short stories. The short stories appeared in the Strand magazine, so they had to be shorter. The other novels could stand by themselves. Now it's time for the Great Detective True-False quiz. True or false? Holmes is the first consulting detective in the world. True. Number 2. Dr. Watson was wounded when he was an army surgeon. Also true. Dr. Watson was wounded by a bullet when he was an army surgeon in Afghanistan. It was after he came home to England from that wound that he met Sherlock Holmes. Number 3. Sherlock Holmes once solved the case by guessing. False. Sherlock Holmes said, "I never guess," and considered guessing destructive to the logical faculties. Number 4. According to Holmes, his brother Mycroft is better at deduction than he is. True. There is a scene in one of the stories where Mycroft Holmes and Sherlock Holmes have a deduction contest, and Mycroft Holmes is the winner. Number 5. Holmes was once beaten in a case by a woman named Irene Adler. True. Holmes once said he was beaten 3 times by men and 1 time by a woman, and always referred to her respectfully as the woman. Number 6. Watson once went in disguise as a wealthy factory owner. True or false? False. Holmes was more likely the one to go in any sort of disguise. Number 7. True or false? Holmes always wanted to be a detective since he was a little boy. False. Holmes always liked figuring things out, looking into mysteries, but he considered it something of a hobby until he was a young man. Number 8. True or false? Holmes is an excellent boxer. True. Boxing and fencing were his 2 favorite sports. Number 9. True or false? Holmes has several different pipes to smoke in different moods. True. Watson could always tell what mood Holmes was in by what pipe he chose. Number 10. Holmes always takes the credit for the cases he solves. False. Holmes sometimes lets the official police or others take credit, and he's just in the background, even though he really solved the case. The case is its own reward. Number 11. Sometimes royalty comes to ask Holmes and Watson for help. True. Kings and queens have come to ask the detective duo for their assistance. Number 12. Holmes has never traveled beyond the countries of Europe. False. He's been to some Asian countries as well. Number 13. Some of the animals in the stories include dogs, a cheetah, a mongoose, a snake, and a baboon. True. There are many interesting animals in the Sherlock Holmes stories. Number 14. Holmes eats little or nothing when he is deep in a case. True. Watson is always trying to get him to take better care of his health, and to get more sleep while he's on a case too, but he doesn't listen. Number 15. Finally, true or false, Holmes always likes to keep his rooms extremely neat. False. Holmes's mind may be very organized, and his clothes may be always neat, but his room looks more like a newspaper printing press room and a chemistry lab exploded with bric-a-brac thrown in. Spoiler alert. A Night Before Sleuthin'. This poem that I'm about to read is a summary of the Sherlock Holmes story, The Blue Carbuncle. Please skip ahead to avoid hearing the name of the culprit if you don't want spoilers, because the poem does give away the end of the story. The poem is based on the rhythm of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" by Clement Moore, because The Blue Carbuncle is the only Sherlock Holmes story that takes place in the Christmas season. A Night Before Sleuthing. 'Twas a morning in Christmas, and in London town a detective was stirring in an old dressing gown. Friend Peterson's been to the Baker Street flat, come bearing a goose and a singular hat. For Miss Henry Baker, said the goose on the label. The hat was a poor one, a rusty old sable. Doc Watson comes in and supposes the thing is the key to a murder or smuggling ring. Holmes queries what he can deduce from the hat, but Watson avers he makes nothing of that. But you know my methods, says Holmes, and they serve the problems you see, but you do not observe. The man's in hard luck spite his big brainy dome, and likely no gas is laid on in his home. Soon Peterson's back, and the man is in shock. Inside of the goose was a bonny blue rock. The Countess of Morcar's dear carbuncle blue, it was stolen last week, and it caused a to-do. How was a gem of such value transferred from a fancy hotel to the crop of a bird? The police have arrested one Horner, ex-thief, who swears he did nothing. He's turned a new leaf. Now Holmes takes the case to untangle such capers and puts lots of ads in the London newspapers. Now comes Mr. Baker, a rosy-cheeked scholar, with floppy Scotch bonnet and turned-up coat collar. He was sorry to learn that his goose was no more, but he took a replacement and hat out the door. The goose had been bought at the old Alpha Inn, so the duo heads off to the bird's origin. The landlord's the fellow who runs the Goose Club, but they weren't his geese, there's a definite rub. 'Twas in Covent Garden, the poulterer's stall of one Breckenridge that provided them all. The sleuth and his colleague will follow this thread. Faces to south then, and quick mark, Holmes said. Where the geese came from, the vendor won't tell. He shuts up his tongue like a clam in a shell. I'll make you a wager, the clever Holmes said, for I'll never believe that your birds were town-bred. The ruse does its work, now they have an address, but fortune delivers a greater success. A suspect approaches, distracted and pale. Holmes takes advantage of this without fail. But tell me your real name, says Holmes, if you please, for using an alias causes unease. It's Mr. John Ryder, says Holmes. Never fear, come back in our cab and the story you'll hear. In front of the fire it soon comes to light that Ryder's the thief, and he's all in a fright. He'd run to his sister's to hide the blue jewel in the crop of a goose. That would everyone fool. He and his fence thought the ruse was great fun, till they opened the goose and found it the wrong one. Now Ryder is sniveling down on the floor, pathetic and guilty, a shrimp to be sure. Holmes, mulling the morals, at last said, no more. Get out, no more words, and he opened the door. With blessings in haste and in grateful surprise, John Ryder jumps up, down the staircase he flies. Said Holmes, 'tis the season for us to forgive, commuting a felony, yes, but I'll live. Clapping Ryder in irons will serve the law's goal, but maybe, just maybe, I'm saving a soul. Now one thing's to say, just to finish this right. Happy sleuthing to all, and to all a good night. In the story, Sherlock Holmes often would figure out things like secret codes. This is an example of the Dancing Men code, or cipher, as they call it. So here's the message. It just looks like little dancing stick figures, but each one of those stands for a letter of the alphabet. Can you figure out what this says? You might want to pause the video and write down or copy these symbols. Here is the key. What does your message say? The answer will be at the end. I think I would be remiss if I did not mention Nate the Great. Nate the Great is the hero of a series of mystery stories that are very early chapter books, written by Marjorie Weinman Charmot and illustrated by Mark Simont. So these are his rules of being a detective. First, you have to think. Second, it helps to have a helper. I have a great one, Sludge, but it's all right if you don't. You have to remember. You have to notice people, places, and things. You have to look for facts and clues. You have to ask questions. You have to take ideas apart and put them together again. You have to figure out what is important and what isn't. And when Nate the Great is hot on the case, he really likes to eat pancakes to help his brain power. Children interested in Sherlock Holmes might want to become a member of the Junior Sherlockian Society. Observe and reason. So anybody can participate in becoming a Junior Sherlockian, but it is aimed primarily at children 8 to 13 years old. And so what you would do is have your 221B experience. So you read 2 things to introduce you to the great detective, then you read 2 of the stories, then you do 1 extension activity, and then you be recognized as an official Junior Sherlockian. So we have the link there on the page, and it will be in the description. I encourage you to go take a look and become a member.